Thomas Harrington stared at the email from his uncle's attorney, reading it for the third time to make sure he understood correctly. At 34, Thomas had never expected to inherit anything, least of all a warehouse property on the edge of his new neighbourhood. A warehouse? What would Uncle Frank even be doing with a warehouse? He muttered, scrolling through the attached documents on his laptop. 6 months ago, Thomas had relocated to the Oak Ridge community, drawn by its reputation for quiet streets and well-maintained properties. As an architect specializing in sustainable design, he could work from anywhere. The move from his cramped downtown apartment to this suburban sanctuary had been a welcome change, allowing him space to breathe and pursue his hobbies. The following Tuesday, Thomas met with Merrill Jacobson, his late uncle's attorney, who handed him a ring of heavy keys. "It's nothing fancy," Merrill explained as they drove to the property. Frank bought it 20 years ago, planning to start a furniture restoration business after retirement. Never quite got around to it. They pulled up to a large metal building sitting on a half-acre lot that bordered the eastern edge of the Oak Ridge community. The warehouse wasn't visible from Thomas's street, tucked behind a small grove of oak trees that separated it from the residential area. Structurally sound, according to the inspection, Merrill continued. Property taxes are modest. Frank paid them through the end of the year. Thomas walked the perimeter, noting the wide gravel driveway that wrapped partially around the building. The warehouse itself was roughly 3,000 square feet with high ceilings and basic utilities. Large roll-up doors faced away from the residential streets, providing privacy from the neighbors. Inside, sunlight streamed through high windows, illuminating a mostly empty space with concrete floors and exposed beams. In one corner sat a few pieces of furniture covered in dusty tarps, his uncle's abandoned projects. "I'll take it," Thomas said, already envisioning the possibilities. His collection of 3 vintage motorcycles, currently in paid storage, could finally come home. The space was perfect for the woodworking equipment he'd been slowly acquiring, but had no room to set up in his house. On his way out, Thomas noticed tire tracks crisscrossing the gravel area near the entrance. A discarded fast food bag tumbled across the lot in the breeze. "Does someone use this space?" Thomas asked. Merrill shrugged. Frank mentioned the neighbors occasionally parked here during big community events. He was pretty easygoing about it. Said it made him feel part of the neighborhood, even though he was rarely here. Thomas nodded absently, already planning the layout for his workshop. A few neighborly courtesies seemed reasonable enough. After all, he wanted to maintain good relations in his new community. As they locked up, neither man noticed the silver-haired figure watching from a parked sedan across the street, talking intently on his phone. 3 weeks after acquiring the warehouse, Thomas arrived with his first load of motorcycles. He punched in the security code for the new padlock he'd installed, only to find a white Lexus SUV parked directly in front of the main entrance. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, scanning the vehicle for any sign of the owner. No note on the dashboard, no one in sight. After 30 minutes of waiting, Thomas called a neighbor he befriended since moving in, Elaine Cortez. "Oh, that's probably Diane Matthews," Elaine explained. "She hosts the book club on Tuesdays. People always park by that old building when the street gets full." 2 days later, Thomas arrived to find 3 more vehicles in his lot. This time, he left notes under each windshield wiper. "This is private property. Please ask before parking. Thomas Harrington, owner." He included his phone number. Only one person called, a flustered mother of twins who apologized profusely. The other notes had disappeared without response. The following weekend, Thomas discovered a glossy newsletter in his mailbox. Despite not being an HOA member due to his warehouse's location just outside the official boundaries, he'd been added to the distribution list. Flipping through, a small box on the last page caught his attention. Reminder. Additional community parking available at the warehouse lot for overflow during sanctioned Oak Ridge events. Please be respectful and do not block the main doors. Thomas stared at the notice in disbelief. Not only were they using his property without permission, but they were officially advertising it. On Monday morning, Thomas walked the 3 blocks to Gerald Weber's meticulously landscaped colonial. The HOA president answered the door in pressed khakis and a polo shirt, despite the early hour. Thomas, what brings you by? Gerald's smile didn't reach his eyes. Thomas showed him the newsletter. I'm concerned about this parking notice. That warehouse is my private property. Gerald clasped Thomas's shoulder with a firm grip. Your Uncle Frank was a community man. He understood the value of neighbours helping neighbours. I appreciate that, but I'm setting up a workshop there. I can't have unknown vehicles blocking access. Gerald's smile tightened. We've had this arrangement for 15 years. The previous board president and Frank shook hands on it. I'm not Frank, Thomas said carefully, and I didn't agree to this. Look, young man, Gerald's tone shifted. This community runs on cooperation. Your uncle understood that. I don't mind occasional parking for special events if people ask first, but it's not a public lot. Gerald's expression hardened. The Oak Ridge Way isn't about asking permission for every little thing. It's about community spirit. As Thomas walked home, he noticed a woman photographing his warehouse from the street. When spotted, she quickly climbed into a car with the HOA logo on the door. That evening, Thomas received an email invitation to the next HOA meeting, despite not being a member. The agenda included an item labelled Discussion of Community Parking Solutions. His property was listed as Exhibit A. For the next 3 months, Thomas attempted to establish boundaries while maintaining neighbourly relations. He attended the HOA meeting where Gerald introduced him as Frank's nephew who's new to our community traditions. When Thomas tried to clarify his position on the parking issue, Gerald smoothly moved to the next agenda item. Thomas compromised by allowing parking during 2 scheduled community events, placing orange cones to protect access to the main doors. Most residents respected the arrangement, though a few grumbled about the new restrictions. On a sweltering Tuesday in July, Thomas received an urgent call from Northern Craftsman Supply. His custom-ordered lathe and CNC machine, equipment he'd invested nearly $18,000 in, would arrive that afternoon rather than Friday due to a scheduling change. We need a loading dock, or at least clear access for the hydraulic lift, the delivery coordinator explained. The machinery weighs over 800 pounds. No problem, Thomas assured him. I'll meet you there at 3. Thomas arrived at the warehouse 30 minutes early to prepare the space, only to find a scene that made his stomach drop. At least 25 vehicles packed his lot, with several directly blocking the main entrance. Colourful balloons tied to his fence posts fluttered in the breeze. A vinyl banner hung nearby, 43rd Annual Oak Ridge Summer Festival, overflow parking. Thomas frantically called the delivery company, but it was too late. The truck was already en route. Next, he called Gerald, who answered on the 4th ring, carnival music blaring in the background. This is completely unacceptable, Thomas said, raising his voice over the noise. I have an expensive delivery arriving now, and no one can access the building. It's the summer festival, Gerald replied, as if explaining something to a child. Everyone knows that's when we use the full lot. I never agreed to. "Your uncle never had a problem with our biggest event of the year," Gerald interrupted. "The festival committee already paid for the event insurance. Just reschedule your delivery." The call ended before Thomas could respond. Minutes later, the delivery truck arrived, idling at the entrance to the property with nowhere to go. "Sorry, sir," the driver said, checking his watch. "We're on a tight schedule. If we can't unload within 30 minutes, we'll have to return the items to the warehouse. Earliest rescheduling would be next month." For the next hour, Thomas went from car to car, trying to locate owners. Some were apologetic, others openly hostile. "This has always been festival parking," snapped a woman in designer sunglasses. "Who do you think you are?" Near the food trucks, Thomas overheard Brenda Coleman, the HOA treasurer, giving directions to a family with a minivan. "The warehouse lot has plenty of space," she said, pointing. "The owner never uses that old building anyway." Thomas stood frozen, watching the delivery truck pull away with his equipment still on board. Something inside him shifted, a final thread of patience snapping clean. That evening, he sat at his kitchen table surrounded by property documents, his laptop open to local municipal codes. Enough was enough. Thomas spent the night poring over documents, his frustration fueling a methodical review of his property rights. The deed clearly indicated the warehouse and surrounding half-acre belonged solely to him, with no easements or shared access agreements. County records showed the property was zoned commercial/light industrial, sitting just outside the Oak Ridge subdivision boundaries, technically not even subject to HOA governance. At 7 a.m., Thomas called Linda Martinez, a property attorney his firm had collaborated with on several projects. She agreed to meet him for coffee that afternoon. "This is straightforward," Linda said after reviewing his documents. "They have absolutely no legal right to use your property without permission. No verbal agreement between your uncle and the previous board carries any weight without documentation, especially with a change in ownership." "So, what are my options?" Thomas asked. Linda outlined 3 potential approaches: send a cease and desist letter, install barriers like bollards or chains, or establish a formal towing policy. "The most legally sound option is proper notification followed by enforcement," she advised. "Document everything meticulously." Thomas nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "I don't want to be the neighborhood villain, but I can't have people treating my property like it's public space." "You're not being unreasonable," Linda assured him. "You attempted compromise. They overstepped repeatedly." That evening, Thomas drafted a formal notice with Linda's guidance. The letter stated clearly, all permission for community parking was revoked effective immediately. Unauthorized vehicles would be subject to towing at owner's expense, and any community use of the property would require written agreement with appropriate liability coverage. The next morning, Thomas visited Precision Signs and ordered 8 conspicuous private property. No parking. Violators will be towed signs with the Eagle Towing Service, contact information. He scheduled installation for Friday afternoon. Thomas then met with Ray Delgado, Eagle Towing's manager. "We deal with situations like this all the time," Ray explained. "Once your signage is properly installed, we can respond to your calls immediately. The vehicle owners pay us directly, no cost to you." "How quickly can you remove multiple vehicles?" Thomas asked. "We have 3 trucks. Can clear about 6 vehicles per hour, depending on the situation." Thomas photographed his property from multiple angles to document its current state, then personally delivered copies of the legal notice to each HOA board member's home. Gerald wasn't in when Thomas knocked, so he took a dated photo of the sealed envelope tucked securely in the door. Brenda Coleman accepted her copy with pinched lips. Gerald won't appreciate this formality, she warned. This isn't about appreciation, Thomas replied evenly. It's about establishing clear boundaries. At the warehouse, Thomas cleared space and prepared for his rescheduled delivery. The signs would arrive tomorrow, and he'd scheduled a contractor to install security cameras next week. For the first time since the festival incident, Thomas felt a sense of control returning. Whatever happened next, he had taken the necessary legal steps to protect his property. Now it was up to the HOA to respect his rights, or face the consequences. Thomas awoke early Saturday morning, his kitchen calendar marked with a red circle around today's date, Oak Ridge Community Yard Sale. Through his bedroom window, he could already see increased traffic on his normally quiet street. He checked his phone. 3 text messages had arrived overnight from unfamiliar numbers. We've always parked at the warehouse during the yard sale. Please reconsider. Your uncle would be disappointed. Don't make this difficult for everyone. Thomas had anticipated this reaction. Gerald had visited him Thursday evening after receiving the notice, dismissing it as unnecessarily formal and suggesting Thomas was overreacting to a minor misunderstanding. When Thomas stood firm, Gerald's friendly facade had slipped momentarily. You know, young man, communities have long memories. You might want to consider how this affects your standing here. By 8:30 am, Thomas drove to his warehouse to find exactly what he'd expected. Despite the prominent new signs installed yesterday, at least 15 vehicles filled his lot. Several owners were actively unloading folding tables and boxes of items to sell, completely ignoring the warnings. Thomas took photos documenting each vehicle and the clearly visible signs. He opened his laptop and logged into the community Facebook group where he posted a final warning. As legally notified, unauthorized vehicles on my warehouse property will be towed at owner's expense beginning at 9:00 am. This is not a community parking lot. Immediately, his post attracted angry reactions and comments. Who does this guy think he is? This is not the Oak Ridge way. Newcomers trying to change our traditions. At precisely 9:00 am, Thomas called Eagle Towing. By 9:15, the first truck arrived. A small crowd gathered as the driver hooked up a silver Lexus, the first vehicle to be removed. A woman in a floral dress rushed forward, waving her arms frantically. You can't do this. We've always parked here during community events. Thomas stepped forward, keeping his voice calm. Ma'am, this is private property. There are multiple signs clearly posted, and formal notice was delivered to the HOA board on Wednesday. But Gerald said it would be fine. He said you were just making a point. By 11:30 am, 17 vehicles had been towed. Thomas's phone buzzed constantly with angry messages and calls, which he documented but didn't answer. Gerald appeared, red-faced and demanding Thomas fix this situation immediately. The situation is fixed, Thomas replied. My property is no longer being used without permission. By early afternoon, an emergency HOA meeting had been hastily arranged at the community centre. Thomas received a text from 5 different board members demanding his attendance. He arrived punctually at 4 p.m. with Linda, his attorney, at his side. The community room buzzed with angry voices that fell silent as they entered. Gerald stood at the front, a poster-sized copy of the original Oak Ridge Community Plan displayed prominently beside him. Mr. Harrington, Gerald's voice carried across the packed room. Would you like to explain to your neighbours why they've each had to pay $175 to retrieve their vehicles today? Thomas stepped forward, Linda close behind him with a thick folder of documentation. The real confrontation was about to begin. The community centre hummed with tension as Thomas faced the assembled residents. Camera phones pointed his way, ready to capture his response to Gerald's accusatory question. "I didn't charge anyone to retrieve their vehicles," Thomas replied evenly. "I simply enforced my property rights after multiple attempts at reasonable compromise were ignored." Linda stepped forward, projecting calm authority. "Perhaps we should review the facts before emotions escalate further." She opened her folder and placed a document on the projector. "This is the property deed showing Mr. Harrington's clear ownership." She cycled methodically through photographs of the delivered notices, dated receipts for the signage installation, and screenshots of Thomas's previous attempts at communication. A murmur spread through the crowd when she displayed Brenda's email to the festival committee, dated after Thomas had explicitly revoked permission. "Use the warehouse lot as usual. The new owner won't actually do anything." Gerald attempted to interject, but Diana Fletcher, a retired judge who had remained quiet until now, raised her hand. "Gerald, the evidence is clear. The HOA has been encouraging trespassing on private property." She turned to the crowd. "I've sat on this board for 7 years, and I'm disturbed by how this situation was handled." The meeting fractured into heated discussions. Some residents maintained that community tradition superseded technicalities, while others began questioning the board's judgment. Thomas stood steady amid the chaos, neither apologizing nor gloating. 3 weeks later, a certified letter arrived at Thomas's home. The Oak Ridge HOA had held a special election. Gerald Weber was no longer president, replaced by Diana Fletcher, who had campaigned on transparency and respect for property rights. The following month, Diana arranged a meeting with Thomas. She arrived with a professionally drafted proposal. A limited easement agreement allowing the HOA to use 20 designated parking spaces during 6 specific annual events, with formal advance notice, proper insurance coverage, and a nominal rental fee that would offset Thomas's property taxes. "This acknowledges your ownership while preserving limited community access," Diana explained. "It's properly documented and fair to all parties." Thomas reviewed the agreement with Linda before signing. "This is what I wanted all along: clear boundaries and mutual respect." By spring, Thomas had completed his workshop setup. The HOA had honoured the agreement during the winter holiday celebration, with members staying within the designated area marked by fresh paint lines. Unexpectedly, the confrontation had sparked community interest in Thomas's craftsmanship. When several neighbours expressed curiosity about his woodworking, Thomas hosted an open house, demonstrating his lathe techniques and showcasing completed projects. Marion Shelby, who had initially been among the angriest about the towing incident, became a regular visitor. "My husband used to do woodworking before his arthritis got bad," she explained. "He loves seeing your projects." The warehouse that had been the centre of conflict gradually transformed into a connection point. Thomas's firm boundaries, paradoxically, had created the space for genuine community relationships to develop, ones based on mutual respect rather than entitlement. During the next Oak Ridge Board meeting, Diana proposed a complete review of all HOA policies, especially those based on the way we've always done things. The motion passed unanimously. "Sometimes," she noted, "it takes an outsider to help us see what needs to change."